So we are entering into a new year, and I like to set myself the challenge to read or reread a number of classic books over the course of the year. I picked out 12, which I'm going to discuss, so that averages out to one a month, which should be manageable, although a few of them are quite long. Some of them are very well established classics, and others are slightly less well known. So I wanted to get a good mixture, and all of these books have a special anniversary surrounding them or a special new event which is specific to 2025. And I just find this gives me good encouragement to read them sooner rather than later, because it is so easy to say, I'll get around to reading that classic one day. But I would love to hear if you have read any of these books and if you would also encourage me to read them, or if you want to join me in reading any of them, or are there any other classic books that you want to get to reading in 2025? Let me know about that in the comments below. First off, Jane Austen was born in 1775, so it is going to be her 250th birthday. So I want to read Emma, her comedy of manners about a young woman who is very spoiled and headstrong and overly confident in her matchmaking abilities. And we see the fallout of this as she tries to pair people up in her English village. At the Jane Austen house in Hampshire, they are going to be having celebrations about her over the course of the year. And I believe in July, there's going to be one specifically about Emma. Now, I have to make a confession, which I hope won't have me cancelled as a bookish person on the internet, but I have never really been a Jane Austen fan. I know she has a huge fan base and there are people who are so passionate about her books, but I've just always found her characters to be quite frustrating to read about, and I'm not someone that needs to read about likable characters or anything like that, but there's just something about them that particularly irritates me. I know she is kind of like sending up the genteel English society, and that her writing is quite witty, but yeah, I've just never fully gelled with it. But I keep reading and hoping that I will latch onto it, and I'm a huge fan of the movie Clueless, which is a loose modern adaptation of this novel, so I'm hoping maybe I'll get on better with this than some other Jane Austen books, and you never know, I might become a full convert and go to some of the events at the Jane Austen house all dressed up in period garb. The author R.D. Blackmore was born in 1825, so it is going to be his 200th birthday, and there's an illustration of him with his face full of whiskers, and he was a novelist and a horticulturalist, which is probably why he was so well known for writing very vividly about the English countryside. And I want to read his most famous novel, Lorna Doone, which I think is his only book which is still in print. And this is the story of a farmer who goes on an adventure and he falls for a woman named Lorna, but they are star-crossed lovers. So it's about the drama and tragedy of that and about his journey. And I bought this book a very long time ago at a used bookstore. There you go, for £3.50. So I've been meaning to read it for ages. The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope was first published in book form in 1875, so 150 years ago, although it was serialized before that. And this story was inspired by the financial scandals of the 1870s, but also satirizes literary circles and authors. And I read the very beginning of this book, and it is so funny. There's something so charming about Trollope's books. I've read a number of them. He was a very prolific author. He wrote a couple of long series, but also many standalone novels, and this is one of them, and it's also his longest book, and I've been meaning to read it for ages because this is actually my grandmother's copy of his novel. She passed away quite a long time ago, and I inherited this book, and all that I know is at the very beginning of the book, she just wrote, "Have read." I don't know what she thought about it. She didn't give it a star rating or anything, anything, and there's no notes or annotations she made, so I'm just going to have to guess what she thought of it. But I am so eager to read this because he was one of her favorite authors of all time. Alice Dunbar Nelson was born in 1875, so it's going to be her 150th birthday. She was a poet, a journalist, and a political activist, and also one of the first generation of African Americans born free in the southern states after the American Civil War. And she was heavily involved in the early stages of the Harlem Renaissance. A really fascinating person. So I want to read her complete short stories. Next is a big one, a classic that I've always been slightly intimidated by and that I've started reading multiple times but never finished. Moby Dick or the Whale by Herman Melville, the story of a sailor named Ishmaelle who joins a whaling expedition headed by Captain Ahab, who is set on revenge against a giant white whale. And the beginning of this novel is very compelling, especially because of all the weird homoeroticism between Ishmaelle and Queequeg. But once it gets into the very technical detail about sailing and whaling, I'm slightly less drawn into it. And that's the point when I've always put it aside. But I'm determined to get through this novel this time. Of course, it is known as one of the great American novels. And I was partly inspired to finally read it because there's going to be a new novel in 2025 called Call Me Ishmaelle by Xiaolu Guo, who is a great writer. I've read a number of her books before, and I'm keen to see what her take is on this book. And of course, the title is a play on the opening line of this novel, which is one of the most famous in all of literature, of Call Me Ishmaelle. An author who is very close to my heart is Virginia Woolf, and probably her most famous novel of all time is Mrs. Dalloway, which was first published in 1925. And this is the story of a society woman who is throwing a party, and it follows all of her thoughts throughout the day as she is moving throughout London and throughout the course of this party. But it is also the story of a veteran of World War I who was severely traumatized by that experience and how their paths slightly overlap. Now, I have, of course, read this novel before. I love it. So I'm really looking forward to rereading it in the centenary of the publication of this book. And when Virginia Woolf was working on this, one of the working titles of it was The Hours, which, of course, the author Michael Cunningham later wrote a novel with that title, which incorporates Virginia Woolf as a character in it. And I just, it's always a joy revisiting Woolf's writing. Manhattan Transfer by John Dos Passos was also first published in 1925, and this story follows a number of different characters in New York City and their urban life as they move into the Jazz Age and the rampant consumerism of the time. And I feel like this author was very well known in his time, but he's slightly gone out of fashion. He was very inspired by modernist authors, by like James Joyce's Ulysses and T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, and he brought that into America. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that style of writing transferred over into the States. Another great American novel, a book that's probably known as the great American novel, is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And this was also first published in 1925, a big year for literature. And of course, this is the classic story of a man named Nick Carraway and his interactions with a mysterious millionaire named J. Gatsby, who seems to have it all and be living the American dream, but he doesn't have the woman that he loves most, named Daisy. Now, I read this novel a very long time ago, and it didn't make that big an impression on me. I know it is known as such a classic, and I have reader friends who reread this book every single year, but now I'm a bit older. I think I'll be able to appreciate it a lot more, and I think it's time that I finally re-experienced this book. And it's something that will partly inspire me to do that is I recently acquired this great manuscript version of the Great Gatsby, which is a reproduction of F. Scott Fitzgerald's actual writing of the book. So you can see his actual handwriting here, and it was his first draft of the novel, and you can see a lot of places where he's crossed out different words and sentences. So I think it'll be so interesting to be reading this novel and flipping through this book to see where he made corrections and how he changed the story. An American author who was born in 1925 is William Styron, who wrote very poignantly about depression, racism, and war. I'm really looking forward to reading his Pulitzer Prize winning novel, The Confessions of Nat Turner, which is the story of a black man who is imprisoned awaiting his death. He was a slave, a preacher, and the only individual who successfully led a slave revolt in America. It's based off from a true story, and it's about time I got to reading this book because I saw on the inside, my parents gifted this novel to me a really long time ago. There's this little note on the inside. And also, I'd seen William Styron speak in the UK a long time ago. I also have this copy of his very short novel, The Long March, and on the inside of it, I have a ticket to the Hay Festival when I saw him speak. He died just a few years after this, but I did get to have him sign this book to me, so you can see his scrawl there. Another author that was born in 1925 was Flannery O'Connor, and I have her complete short stories, which won the National Book Award for fiction. And I've read a number of these stories, but not all of them. And I think it'll be good to have a collection of short stories as well that I can just sort of read here and there throughout the year. And her stories are filled with symbolism and religious references. She's also slightly a controversial author because of the racist values that she had, which was shown in a lot of her letters, which were published. There was a really interesting article in the New York Times of how racist was Flannery O'Connor. But of course, I don't read literature for moral education. I read it to learn about the full breadth of the human experience. And I've had this copy for a long time. It was gifted to me by my cousin Martin. You can see his sign on the inside there, and he very kindly gave it to me. We exchange books quite a lot. The Lonely Londoners by Sam Selvon, and this novel follows a number of working class West Indians in London in the 1950s. So it was a real pioneering work and one of the first of its kind. I don't think it's a story with a very strong plot, but it's more about observing the daily lives and interactions of all of these different characters. And Selvon writes about the lives of his characters in such a funny and poignant way. I've read his novel, The Housing Lark, before and really enjoyed it. And this was first published in 1956, but I'm so keen to read it now because there's going to be a new theatrical production and adaptation of this book in London in 2025. So I want to get to reading it soon. And finally, first published 50 years ago in 1975 is Heat and Dust by Ruth Prawer Jhabvala. And this is the story of an English woman who travels to India and her romance with an Indian man there. But it tells it slightly at a remove through the point of view of her step-granddaughter who also travels to India and is kind of tracing the path and story of her great-grandmother's life. Now, the author was partly inspired to write this book because of E.M. Forster's novel Passage to India, which is a book I read in 2024 with my online book club and was such a great classic to reread, and I really appreciated so much more experiencing it now at a later stage in my life. But I'll be reading this for the very first time, and of course the author wrote a number of screenplays based off from E.M. Forster's novel, and even won an Oscar for one of them. And she is the only author to have won both an Oscar and the Booker Prize. She won the Booker Prize for this book, and recently I was also partly inspired to read this because recently I went to the Booker Prize Library at Waterstones, and I made a whole vlog about that experience, which I'll link below in case you haven't seen it. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to finally getting to this book. So those are a lot of classic novels I want to read in 2025. Like I said, I'd love to know if you've read any of these books and what you think about them, or if you want to join me in reading them, or if there are any other classics that you have your sights set on that you are definitely finally going to read it in 2025 or reread it, because that experience is so great as well. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.